Under the house. Averly made her way down the stairs to the second-floor landing. She stopped there for a moment, hesitating. She stood before a large portrait of a female raccoon in a bright seafoam green lace dress. She was holding a matching parasol over her shoulder, and the shade that covered her face obscured her smile slightly. She studied the painting for a while, and then her gaze fell to the small golden placard that was attached to the bottom of the frame in the middle. Lady Amberstone, the First, it read. Averly looked up and studied the eyes of the raccoon before her. Bright green eyes, rare for a raccoon, stared back at her. One was shaded dully under the shadow cast by the parasol overhead. The other shone with fiery intensity over Averly's head. Averly noticed how Lady Amberstone smiled, pretty but tight-lipped, like she knew something that artists didn't. She must have been a very strong woman, Averly thought to herself. She steeled herself and turning made her way down the stairs to the bottom floor. She was disoriented when she reached the bottom of the twisting staircase and mildly dizzy as she had sped up as she descended. She stopped at the floor's landing and waited for the dizziness to pass. She studied the hallway while she waited. Stone walls stretched out in each direction with no indication of which way to the living room where Jefferies waited for her. She took a moment and remembered the direction the group had come from and had headed, turned in the opposite direction and made her way down the hallway. Shortly after, Averly came upon large oak doors, stained deep brown years ago by some crafts animal. Above the doors, satin brass read the words lounge. Here we go, she thought, and swallowing against the butterflies in her stomach, she knocked on the large door. Come in, responded Jefferies instantly. Averly pushed against the door and went into the lounge beyond. Averly closed the door behind her. It slid back into place and closed without a sound. The room was massive. There were large bookcases that ran the length and width of the room, built into each wall. The bookcases wrapped around the room until they met in the middle of the far wall where a humongous fireplace had been built into the stone. The fireplace was currently dormant, a black mesh grate obscuring the darkened cavity behind it. Overstuffed chairs and couches dotted the floor, arranged so that those sitting in the room could have a private area or sit in a group as they had so desired. Jeffrey was sitting in a large chair near the window, facing out onto the street before him. Averly felt surprised at being able to hear his voice so clearly from that far. He's got quite a set of lungs in him, she thought to herself, as she made her way over to where he was sitting. I'm glad you came down. In a few minutes I was going to go and check on you, said Jeffries without turning around. His voice startled Averly. Sorry about that. I was hoping to let you finish your lunch before I came down and bothered you, said Averly, shyly kicking her leg against the rug that was spread across the sitting area. Jeffries got up from his chair, its ancient springs squeaking in protest as he moved, and stood in front of Averly. Wordlessly he moved across the large room, Averly following close behind, and stopped in front of one of the stone bookcases built into the foundation's wall. He reached up for a large book and pulled the upper corner down towards him, jerking it downward with such force that Averly thought he was going to drop the book on his head. Instead, it fell part way and clicked heavily. It slowly fell back into its original position on the shelf as Jeffries moved out of the way as the bookcase turned in on itself and a doorway opened behind it, showing the beginnings of a stone stairwell that led downward. Averly looked at the stairwell, shocked. She peered down into the darkness. Got to go down there? She asked uncertainly. Jeffries smiled at her and said, Yes, my dear, we do. What you're looking for is down there. We'd best hurry, too, before the door closes itself. She hadn't noticed before, but the door was shrinking as they stood there. The bookcase was swinging its way back into its first position. It's on a timer. We'd better get moving, said Jeffries. He stepped down into the staircase and slipped into the darkness beyond. Averly followed as the bookcase continued to swing shut slowly behind her. It slid against the floor, stone on stone, and closed completely as she made her way down the steps. They made their way down in pure darkness, Averly feeling for each stone step with her leading leg, placing a foot uncertainly until she found the rhythm of the stairwell and made her way down at an increasing speed. She reached the bottom of the stairwell and stumbled as her footing misjudged another step being there. She fell into Jeffries as he waited for her. He caught her before she could knock him over and held her up with both arms. You all right, dear? He asked. Yes, replied Averly, shaken. She retrieved her balance, and Jeffries let her go. Sorry about the lack of light. I'm so used to coming down here that I didn't think to light a torch for you, said Jeffries. He reached out into the gloom and placed a paw around the end of a torch attached to the wall. It caught fire almost immediately and lit the room they were in. Large white and gray stones made up the walls. Averly peered into the distance as far as the light would allow. It appeared to be a long hallway that split in two in the distance. Now, I need you to do something for me, said Jeffries, his small pearly teeth glinting in the torchlight as he smiled. What's that? Asked Averly. Keep your left paw on the wall at all times and follow close behind me. There are traps set in place for those unlucky animals that don't know the way to go, and I need to make sure you're paying attention as we make our way down to the vault below us, said Jeffries. Averly immediately stuck her paw out against the wall and put her weight against it so she wouldn't accidentally remove it while they walked. It's all right, said Jeffries, laughing. You'll be fine as long as you follow me. He turned around and started down the hall. Ailey followed behind him, dragging her arm along the wall as she went. They walked down the hallway quickly and took the pathway on the left and continued on down, Jefferies holding the torch out in front of him as they went. Switch sides, says Jefferies as they came to another set of opposing pathways. Averly did as she was told. She could easily reach both sides of the hall with her arms outstretched. They continued and took the path to the right. Jefferies began to whistle to himself as he walked. It was a jovial tune and put Averly at ease as they kept going on in the light of the torch. The pathway slanted downwards, and the stones became large cubes of deep brown rock. They glowed orange in the light of the torch's fire. Jefferies stopped whistling momentarily. "We're going under the house's foundation at this point," said Jefferies. Averly looked up and noticed that the roof of the passageway was slanting at a greater rate than the floor did as they traveled. At first she had to hunch her shoulders to clear the ceiling properly, but then had to fold herself at the waist to fit properly. Jefferies looked back at her. "Yes, sorry about the size difference. Raccoons tend to be much smaller than wolves," said Jefferies. Averly was almost nearly bent in half by the time they reached the end of the hallway, as they passed out into a large stone room. The light from the torch showed that the roof slanted upwards sharply until it reached to a wall with large stone doors at the far end of the room. Embedded in the stone was a large metal A that glinted softly around its edges from the torch. "Stop here," said Jefferies. Averly stopped abruptly as she walked into the room. She bent upwards and stretched her back out, and she stood up properly. "Wait for a moment. I'll tell you when to come across," said Jefferies. He jumped from the place he was standing and landed on a white stone that touched the wall nearest him. "You're going to have to follow my movements exactly. This room is rigged to fail if you make a mistake." Averly gulped audibly. "All right, I'll do my best," said Averly. The distance between where Jefferies stood and Averly wasn't very far for her. She took a wide step and was standing where Jefferies had directed her to be. Immediately he jumped to the next stone, this time a soft red in the firelight. Averly did have to do a small hop that time to reach the stone. Before she could regain her balance fully, Jeffrey had left and was standing on another lime green stone. They had traveled nearly half the room in 3 steps. They made their way across the room, jumping, skipping, and hopping stone to stone until Jefferies directed her to the final stone, an oblong slab in the center of the room. Averly leapt from her position and landed hard on the slab, Jefferies steadying her after she landed. They stood there before the doors waiting as she regained her footing and stood up. "Place your paw on the door," said Jefferies. Averly blinked twice and looked at the wombat. "You're sure that'll open it?" said Averly. "Of course," said Jefferies, smiling at her. Averly steadied herself once again and lifted her arm to the door. She placed her right paw against the cool stone. Nothing happened. Averly turned to Jefferies. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Oh, that's right," said Jefferies, laughing to himself. His mood had become more and more relaxed the farther down they'd come. He seemed to be enjoying himself down in the dark. He placed his paws against the door, spacing them shoulder-width apart. "Match your paws to mine," Jefferies said jovially. Averly did so. "Now push with me," said Jefferies. Averly threw her body weight behind the arms and fell through the doorway. The door swung open easily. Averly looked at him incredulously, sitting on the floor of the room she had fallen into. "That's all we had to do? I thought something was going to happen when I put my paws against the door," said Averly, upset that she had fallen. "I never said that anything was going to happen when you did that," said Jefferies, laughing mildly to himself. "They always think there's something magical to opening a large stone door." Averly's face flushed in anger and embarrassment. "Well, I've been writing random shapes down for the last 3 days, watching them glow in the dark like it's nothing. How am I supposed to know it's just a plain old door?" she asked. Averly got up off the floor and dusted herself off with quick anger jabs of her paws. "Because if it had been magical, your tattoo would have glowed at the interaction. Not to mention you don't even have your focusing gem yet," said Jefferies, doing his best to calm her down. "Not many animals can use magic, and only the rarest of them can use it without something to focus their attention, and even then it takes them years to have interactions without needing their gem. You saw how I just waved my arm? Well, I suppose you couldn't have, but I waved my arm over the torch to light it. It took me decades to learn to do properly. You wouldn't believe the times I set my pants on fire trying to learn how to do it without my earring. I still can't." It was then that Averly noticed the small glinting spots above the wombat's ears. A green stone set in dull black metal shone on each of the wombat's ears. Averly felt her nails digging into her palms and looked down at her fists. She hadn't realized she was clenching them, took a deep breath, let it out, and calmed down. "All right, that's fair enough," said Averly. She looked around the room they had come in. The ceiling stretched upwards from them and leveled off in the distance. It was low, but still tall enough for Averly to stand up straight without having to bend over at all. The walls were covered in large dusty picted a mouse clothed in a red robe propelling a shaft of yellow light from behind a large blue gem on top of a scepter against a group of otters in dark black robes. She looked around the room. The tapestry spread out as far as she could see, until they were blocked by large wooden bookcases. Each bookcase was filled with dusty rolls of paper and tomes with covers so ancient that any semblance of writing on them had faded into the ages. She took in a breath. The air was cool and dusty. Particles fell slowly in sheets in the light of the torch, disturbed by the two animals opening the door so quickly. "This way, my dear," said Jefferies, and walked in between the bookcase and then disappeared from view. Averly hurried after him, fearing she would lose him in the labyrinth. He came around the corner of the first two bookcases and almost bumped headfirst into him. "Easy, my dear. I'm not going to leave you here to find what you need by yourself. We're going to make our way into the library and into the vaults at the other end of the room. Be careful, though, as everything here is incredibly delicate and almost everything is irreplaceable. You must go slowly or you may end up knocking something over. Then we really would have a problem on our paws," said Jefferies, smiling up at her. He turned around and kept on going. Averly started behind him, slowed her pace to match his, and followed him between the books and scrolls. They walked between the bookcases, which towered over both of them, as they moved into the middle of the room. The path they followed changed ways, seemingly at random as they went. Averly almost lost Jefferies a few times as he switched his direction. Turning corners she almost missed, as she lost herself in the countless tomes and scrolls. It wasn't hard to find him again, as it quickly went pitch black without his torch, though she did have to double back twice, groping for the edge of the shelves nearest to her, find the corner of the pathway. Both times he had continued walking on as though no one was following him. On the second misstep down the wrong way, Jeffrey said, "Keep up, dear. If you head in the wrong direction for too long, we may find it impossible to locate each other again. There are dangerous things in this room, and I wouldn't want you to fall prey to something set up centuries ago to stop some would-be vandals." He turned to look at her, his teeth glinting in the firelight. "Sorry, I've just never seen so many books in one place before," said Averly, turning breathlessly up towards the shelves that nearly reached the ceiling of the stone cavern. "We've been collecting these long before the city expanded beyond its original walls," said Jefferies. "The Amberstones were long ago appointed the magical advisors to the ruling families within the castle. It was the only way they could amass such a collection of treasures in the relative safety of Tanzeria." Jefferies turned back and continued on. Averly did her best to stay within an arm's length of the wombat as they went deeper into the darkness. They continued onward for what seemed like ages, switching left and right as the paths diverged and came onto themselves again from opposing directions. Averly kept up with the wombat as he moved undeterred between the seemingly random pathways and through the room. They rounded two of the huge bookcases and Jefferies halted. Averly stopped next to him. The bookcases entered their enclosure and pitch black stretched out before the two animals, torchlight unable to penetrate the full length of the space before them. "We're almost there," said Jefferies. As Averly stood there peering into the darkness, she noticed that she was covered in a film of dust that had been kicked up as the two of them had made their way into the labyrinth. Averly looked back at the way they had come. Their footsteps could be seen receding into the shadows behind them. She patted her arms and legs, small puffs of dust echoing her shape as she moved. Averly coughed as she breathed in the centuries of sedentary particles rising from her clothing. Jefferies turned to Averly and began patting her on the back. The dust clouds rose into the room around them and settled quietly on the floor beneath their feet. Averly continued to cough, attempting to catch her breath as best she could. Jefferies rubbed her back as the fit calmed itself. Averly bent forward, taking slow, deep breaths through her nose. She straightened up, holding on to Jefferies' arm as she steadied herself. "Thanks," said Averly, peering into the darkness before them, unsure of where to go. "What do we do now?" she asked, squinting against the nothingness and releasing his arm. "We walk over this way," said Jefferies, holding out his arm to Averly once again. "Hold on to me, dear. This part is a bit trickier." She grasped his forearm with her paw and he pulled her in closer to him. "You're going to have to match my rhythm for this bit," said Jefferies, placing his left foot in front of him. "Place your foot next to mine." Averly did as she was told. Jefferies stretched his right foot out in front of him. "And again," said Jefferies. Again, Averly did as she was told. "Follow me like this until we reach the end of the room. It's only a short distance." They moved in synchronized motion, step by step, across the room, Jefferies holding the torch with one paw while leading Averly with the other. He stopped and turned 90 degrees to the right, and Averly did the same. They continued on in this fashion until they could make out the walled corner of the room from the torchlight. Tapestries similar to the ones adorning the entrance of the room hung on the walls. Gold thread interlaced between the animals pictured and the spells they cast caught glimmers from the torch. Averly studied the one nearest her. An owl was flying over a large crowd of otters carrying spears and shields, its legs placed out before it in a predatory manner. Around one leg was a silver bracelet with a series of blue stones lining the length of it. Green beams fell from the bracelet down on the heads of the otters, who were bent over carrying behind their shields. Some of them had dropped their spears on the ground and were turned the other way, running. "Are most of these trinkets used in times of war?" asked Averly. Jefferies faced the tapestry, walked in front of it, and studied it for a moment. "Not always, but often the need for animals who can wield such powers are found during times of strife," said Jefferies. "That owl there, for instance, Athandra, was a child barely out of her shell when the royal guards found her and brought her to the Amberstones to learn the craft. They leveraged her abilities against the roaming bandits of the land surrounding Tanzeria and brought on nearly 5 decades of uninterrupted peace between the towns surrounding the castle, allowing the first major expansion of the city. The trade routes built between the nations because of her work brokered long-lasting peace that lasted until today." Jefferies turned around and faced Averly. Our kind are important to the continued prosperity of the world, even if no one ever knows our names, said Jefferies. Averly smiled at the wombat. So where do we go from here? Asked Averly, twisting on her heel to face the wall stretching out before them. Jefferies headed towards the wall, running a paw alongside him as he went. Averly kept close behind him. Jefferies stopped after a few paces, stretching his small claws outwards against the stones of the wall. He ran his palm over the cool blocks in a circular motion, searching. What are you looking for? Asked Averly curiously. Jefferies looked back over his shoulder at her. You'll see, he said, running his palm upwards in a straight line and sweeping it back down to his knees, circling over and over. Hold this for me, would you, dear? He handed the torch to Averly. She took it for him, holding it over his shoulder. He placed both palms to the wall and continued to search, periodically taking a step to the right as each motion was completed, only to start again. Minutes passed. Averly repositioned the torch over Jeffrey's head, casting a shadow between his outstretched arms while illuminating his paws clearly and the dusty dry stones before them. Please visit anchor.fm/divergentmind to leave a message so that I may get back to you. Thank you. Have a nice day. So Anchor is asking me to ask you to support me financially. I would ask that you go to my Patreon to do that, which is patreon.com/divergentmind. It means you can either become a monthly subscriber at a different tier of $1 to $3 to $5. I'm not looking for a lot. I'm not asking for a lot. I'm not asking for anything. This is going to go to the end of my podcast. I don't like it when podcasts straight up ask you for money when I'm doing okay. Well, I'm not doing okay. I'm surviving now to the point that I can make this. I would love to be able to make improvements to this by, say, getting... So basically, I'm running off an iPad, and I would like to improve it by getting different things that would make it better. Maybe some headphones that monitor output, or a better mic. Though the mic I got was from JWife, so I might not even use the better mic. You know what I mean? It's all about whatever I need at the time, but really it's just to get healthy again, because I'm currently over 300 pounds and I don't want to die that young. I would really like to be able to afford some vegetables so I can go back to my vegetarian diet, because being this big sucks. And I'm happy to sit in a chair all day, but I really got to walk my butt off, literally. So that's what the money would be for. It would be for healthy food, because I can't afford it. I can afford ramen and pasta and rice and beans, but I can't live on carbs, because that's how you get this big on antipsychotics. Junk food and carbs, which is just cheap and plentiful around me. So I would like to leave my house and just lose some weight. And to do that, I would like to go to the store and buy some vegetables, please. But you don't have to do anything. I'm not asking you to. I'm not begging. I'll figure it out on my own. Much pleasure, Jay.
Hey people, take a listen to the Divergent Mind podcast. You get both insight into living with a serious mental illness, and get to listen to a lovely tale about a journey cute little animals need to take. Don't miss out, and remember, divergent minds don't need to think alike.